Disclaimer: this story is for entertainment and inspirational purposes only. It is a fictionalized account based on common storytelling themes. Any resemblance to actual people, events, or companies is purely coincidental. It was a regular Tuesday morning at the headquarters of one of the largest tech companies in the country. The tension in the air was thick. Dozens of engineers, analysts, and highly paid specialists paced back and forth, staring at their screens, scratching their heads, completely stuck. For the past 6 weeks, a mysterious system glitch had been costing the company thousands of dollars every hour. No one could figure it out. The CEO, a hard-nosed millionaire known for turning small startups into billion-dollar empires, had brought in every expert money could buy, but the problem only got worse. People whispered about the pressure. Layoffs were being quietly mentioned. The investors were calling nonstop. A solution was needed and fast. But every attempt failed. Every fix created a new issue. The board was getting nervous. The media was starting to catch wind of it. 20 different specialists had flown in from around the world. All of them left confused, frustrated, and defeated. And just when hope seemed to run out, something happened that nobody expected. While the so-called experts argued over graphs and lines of code, a quiet man mopped the hallway floor nearby. He was hard to miss, really tall, slim, probably in his late 50s. Wore the same faded uniform every day. Most people barely noticed him, but his name was Joe. Joe the janitor. Black, quiet, and always on time. He never said much, just nodded, did his work, and left. But on that day, Joe paused near the glass-walled conference room where the specialists were gathered. He listened for a moment, eyes narrowing slightly. Then he knocked softly and stepped inside. At first, no one even looked up. "Excuse me," he said in a calm but firm voice. "I think I know what the problem is." The room went silent. A few of the engineers exchanged glances. Someone even chuckled under their breath. The CEO, sitting at the head of the table, looked annoyed. "You think you know what's wrong with our system?" he asked, half amused, half irritated. Joe nodded. "I've seen this before. Not the exact same thing, but I used to work with systems like these. Long time ago." The specialists looked at each other. One of them smirked and muttered, "This should be good." But the CEO, maybe out of desperation, maybe out of curiosity, gave a slow nod. "All right, you've got 1 minute." Joe walked over to the nearest monitor. He didn't touch anything at first. He just looked, scanning the lines of data with quiet focus. Then he pointed to a section of the code and said something that made everyone stop breathing. "This loop right here," he said, tapping gently on the screen. "It's running twice. It's conflicting with the feedback timer. That's why your systems keep resetting." Dead silence. One of the engineers frowned, leaned in, and started typing quickly. Then it happened. The error that had paralyzed the company for over a month disappeared. Just like that. People stared at the screen in disbelief. The room exploded into whispers, then gasps. One of the senior tech officers whispered, "He's right. He's completely right." That was the issue. The CEO stood up slowly. He looked at Joe as if seeing him for the first time. "How did you?" But before he could finish, Joe simply smiled, nodded, and turned to leave. He picked up his mop and continued down the hallway. Now you'd think that would be the end of the story. Just a lucky moment, a forgotten genius helping out and fading back into the background. But what happened next, nobody saw coming. The CEO didn't go back to his office. He followed Joe. And within 48 hours, the entire company's future changed because of a janitor that nobody had paid attention to until he solved in 1 minute what 20 specialists failed to figure out. But what exactly did the millionaire CEO do after that? Let's just say it shocked everyone from the boardroom to the break room. And Joe? Well, his story was only just beginning. Stay tuned. The CEO walked briskly after Joe, confusion and curiosity battling in his expression. This man, this janitor, had just done something none of the high-paid specialists could. Not with their degrees, not with their experience, not with their expensive tools. Joe, with his mop in hand and worn-down shoes, had saved the company thousands, maybe even millions. But how? The hallway was quiet except for the sound of Joe's steps and the soft squeak of the mop bucket wheels. "Wait," the CEO called out. "I need to talk to you." Joe stopped and slowly turned around. His eyes were calm, steady, like a man who had nothing to prove. "Yes, sir." The CEO hesitated. "How did you know that? About the loop, the feedback timer? That's not something you just guess." Joe wiped his hands on a cloth and looked at the floor, like he was deciding whether to say more. Then he looked up and said, "Before this job, I used to work in systems engineering. Complex ones. Long time ago. Life just took a turn. The CEO tilted his head. Systems engineering? For who? Joe gave a slight smile. A company that doesn't exist anymore. Government project. Military systems. I was one of the best in my team, until I wasn't. That answer only raised more questions. The CEO wanted to press for more, but Joe was already turning back to his work. You don't owe me anything, sir. I just saw something I could fix. That's all. But it wasn't just that. And the CEO knew it. This wasn't luck. Joe didn't stumble across a fix. He understood it. In a single glance, he'd seen through layers of code that had confused some of the sharpest minds in tech. That kind of instinct doesn't just fade. Back upstairs, the board was in a frenzy. Phones were ringing. Word was spreading fast. The error was gone, systems were back online, and losses had stopped. But the question on everyone's mind wasn't just how it got fixed, but who had done it. When the CEO told them, the room went silent again. A janitor? Someone whispered. He used to be an engineer, the CEO said. He fixed in 1 minute what our entire team couldn't in 6 weeks. Nobody laughed this time. In the hours that followed, the CEO asked around quietly. He checked Joe's records. No social media. No resume on file. Hired through a temp agency 2 years ago. No one had ever asked about his past, and Joe had never volunteered it. Most people just walked past him like he was invisible. That night, the CEO couldn't sleep. Something didn't sit right. Not just the mystery of Joe's past, but something deeper. Why would someone with that level of brilliance end up pushing a mop for a living? What happened to him? The next morning, the CEO arrived early and found Joe already in the lobby cleaning the glass doors. He didn't waste time. Joe, I want you to come upstairs with me. Let's talk. Joe hesitated. I'm on shift, sir. I'll cover it. They rode the elevator in silence, the CEO studying Joe like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. In his office, he offered coffee, which Joe politely declined. Then he sat across from him, leaning forward. Why are you really here, Joe? Joe looked out the window, his eyes distant. Let's just say, I made some choices. Trusted the wrong people. Lost my family. Lost my work. Had to start over. Why not go back to tech? The CEO asked. Joe gave a tired smile. When you fall from high enough, people don't ask what you know. They ask what you did. I stopped trying to explain. I just needed a job. Something steady. The CEO didn't know what to say to that. But one thing was clear, Joe wasn't just some guy with a lucky guess. He was the real deal. And the company had overlooked him for 2 whole years. Just then, the door knocked. It was one of the engineers holding a file. Sir, there's something else. The system wasn't just glitching, it was being accessed remotely. Repeatedly. Same hidden signal buried deep. We think someone was exploiting it. The CEO sat up. Joe's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a mistake, the CEO asked. No, sir, the engineer said. It looks like someone was using the flaw. Quietly. Over time. Joe's voice came low and serious. I've seen that before. Someone planted it. Probably months ago. Maybe longer. The CEO's face darkened. You're saying we were being sabotaged? Joe didn't answer directly. He just stared at the file, then at the monitor on the CEO's desk. He was seeing something the rest still couldn't. The room went quiet again. Heavy. The kind of silence that comes right before everything changes. Whatever Joe had uncovered, it was deeper than anyone had guessed. And the man who'd spent the last 2 years cleaning floors might be the only one who could expose the truth. But not everyone wanted the truth to come out. What Joe was about to step into was far more dangerous than a system glitch. The next few days were anything but normal inside the company. Whispers spread across every floor like wildfire. People who had once passed by Joe without a second glance were now watching him carefully. Some were curious. Some were impressed. Others were nervous. The fact that a poor black janitor had not only solved a $1 million system glitch but also uncovered signs of a possible cyber attack had shaken the entire organization. Behind closed doors, the CEO met with a small group of trusted executives and security specialists. The company's internal systems had been compromised, that much was clear now. Someone had used the software flaw buried deep within layers of code to gain access. Financial data, internal emails, even product prototypes had likely been viewed or copied. It wasn't just an IT problem anymore. This was corporate espionage. And the most unsettling part? Whoever had done it was either still inside the company or had help from someone who was. As the CEO tried to wrap his head around the scope of the threat, Joe continued his routine as if nothing had changed. He still cleaned the same floors. Still clocked in and out on time. But every once in a while, he'd glance at a flickering hallway monitor or study a passing server log with that sharp, knowing look in his eyes. It was clear to those paying attention Joe hadn't stopped investigating. In fact, he had just begun. One afternoon, as Joe was emptying a trash can outside the server room, a young intern named Malik approached him. Malik had always been polite, one of the few who'd said hello to Joe even before all the attention. He glanced around, then leaned in and whispered, "Mr. Joe, someone's messing with the logs." Joe paused. "What logs?" "The access records. I saw them last week. They were different. Now a bunch of them are gone. Like someone wiped them clean." Joe's eyes narrowed. "Can you show me?" They met later in the break room, away from security cameras. Malik pulled up the files from a backup he'd saved. Joe scanned the data, his fingers tapping slowly on the table. "This isn't just a cover-up," he said softly. "It's a pattern. They're erasing traces of remote access right before each major financial update." "You think someone's manipulating the reports?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Joe nodded. "They're stealing data, sure. But they're also planting fake numbers. It's insider fraud. Could be someone high up." Meanwhile, the CEO was facing pressure from the board. Investors wanted answers. He couldn't tell them the full truth yet, too many unknowns. But he knew one thing for sure, without Joe, they'd be blind. Still, not everyone in leadership agreed. Late one evening, an emergency meeting was called. A few senior executives had discovered that Joe had once been investigated in a classified project nearly a decade ago. Records were incomplete, redacted. But the whispers were enough to stir doubt. He could be involved in this, one executive warned. He appears out of nowhere, solves a crisis, and now he's snooping through our files? The CEO stood firm. He's not the problem. He's the reason we even know there is a problem. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. Security protocols around Joe were quietly changed. Cameras started tracking his movements more closely. Access doors he'd used freely before were now restricted. And one morning, Joe arrived to find his janitor badge wouldn't scan at the front gate. They were trying to freeze him out. But Joe didn't panic. He'd seen this kind of play before. When powerful people start to feel exposed, they don't just deny, they erase. And if he was right, the people behind the sabotage weren't just after money. They were after control. Control of sensitive data. Control of the company's future. Joe reached out to Malik through a secure line. "Meet me tonight. Don't use your company phone. And don't trust anyone you don't know." Whatever was happening inside that building was bigger than just a system glitch or a bad line of code. It was a trap. A setup. And someone was willing to bury the truth no matter who got caught in the crossfire. The deeper Joe looked, the more he realized this wasn't about a poor janitor solving a bug. This was about a silent war happening behind glass walls and glowing screens. And the next move could decide who gets exposed and who disappears. Night had fallen, and the company building stood silent, its tall glass windows glowing faintly under the city lights. Inside, everything seemed calm, but underneath that calm was a storm ready to break. Joe and Malik met in the underground parking lot, far from the eyes of cameras and sensors. Malik looked nervous, clutching a flash drive tightly in his hand. "I copied everything I could," Malik said, his voice shaky. "Server access logs, altered reports, admin emails. There's stuff in here you wouldn't believe." Joe took the drive carefully. His face was unreadable, but his eyes told the story. He already suspected what Malik had found. There was no more doubt now. Someone at the top had been orchestrating the data breach, using the system flaw to siphon off sensitive company assets and planting fake financial data to manipulate stock values. It wasn't just sabotage, it was theft on a corporate scale. But before Joe could say a word, headlights appeared across the lot. A black SUV rolled slowly toward them, stopping just a few feet away. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. Joe stepped slightly in front of Malik, protective, cautious. Then a voice came from the shadows behind them. "You've been asking too many questions, Joe." They turned. A man in a sharp gray suit stood under the dim light of a stairwell exit. He wasn't just security. This man had power written all over him. One of the senior executives, part of the inner circle. The same ones who had tried to turn the board against Joe. And now he wasn't hiding anymore. "We know what you're trying to do," the man said, slowly walking forward. "But you're too late. The data's already been moved. The system's being wiped. And by tomorrow morning, this entire thing will be buried." Malik's eyes widened. Joe stayed still, calm. You really think people will believe a janitor and an intern? The man continued. Look around. You don't have a badge. You're already locked out. You're nothing. Joe didn't flinch. Then why are you so scared? The man froze. Just for a second. And that hesitation was everything. Joe took Malik's flash drive and slipped it into a small device he'd brought with him, a signal booster disguised in a phone charger. It blinked once. Data was already uploading. But they weren't safe yet. Suddenly, the SUV doors opened. Two figures stepped out dressed in black. No words. Just purpose. The air turned cold. Joe whispered to Malik, run. Get out now. And just like that, everything exploded into motion. Malik ran. His footsteps echoed through the empty parking structure as he clutched the second copy of the flash drive tightly in his pocket. Joe had slipped it to him in that split second before the men stepped out of the SUV. It was a backup just in case. Joe had stayed behind, facing the men alone, giving Malik the only chance to escape. But just as Malik reached the stairwell, he nearly collided with someone coming down. Malik! It was Ava, the CEO's assistant. Breathless, wide-eyed, holding her phone tightly. They're after Joe, aren't they? He didn't answer, just nodded and kept moving. But Ava followed, speaking quickly. You need to see this, she said, showing him a message on her screen. An internal security alert, just issued. Joe's name was now flagged in the system as a person of interest in a fabricated cyber attack. They were pinning the whole thing on him. That's the plan, Malik whispered. They're making him the fall guy. Ava nodded. The CEO doesn't know. He's being blocked out too. They've hijacked everything from the inside. Meanwhile, back in the garage, Joe stood calm, facing the men in black. The executive's voice echoed off the walls. You should have stayed invisible, Joe. Would have been safer. But Joe was no longer just the janitor. You're not scared of me, Joe said. You're scared of what I know. The man smirked. Then maybe it's time no one hears it. Just then, the overhead lights flickered. Then again. Then died completely. Darkness. A deep hum echoed through the building. Emergency power struggled to come on. The network was being hit again. But this time not from the outside. A second breach was happening in real time. But who was behind it? Joe wasn't the only one digging. Someone else was pulling strings in the shadows, and their motives weren't clear at all. The emergency lights finally flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the parking garage. But the SUV was empty. The men in black were gone. And the executive? Nowhere in sight. Joe stood alone, breathing heavily, a cut on his forehead, but still standing. The flash drive in his pocket had finished uploading. Every corrupted log, every hidden financial manipulation, every false report, was now in the hands of someone who could make it public. Upstairs, Malik and Ava burst into the CEO's office, ignoring security's shouts behind them. Ava slammed her phone on the desk. Sir, you need to see this now. The CEO scrolled through the data, his eyes growing wide. This is everything. Malik nodded. Joe exposed it. But they tried to take him out. They tried to frame him. The CEO moved fast. Within minutes, legal was alerted, security teams redirected, and the media department was told to prepare a press release. The traitors inside the company had been caught red-handed. One by one, their names surfaced, several senior executives, including the one who confronted Joe. They'd been rigging financial data for months, preparing to crash the company stock and sell off assets for profit. But just as Joe entered the building again, battered but calm, the unexpected twist came. A second data burst hit the internal servers, this one not from Joe's drive. It was cleaner, sharper. It exposed another layer, something even deeper. A shadow account linked directly to a former board member, and a silent investor no one had noticed. The CEO looked at Joe. This wasn't just about fraud, was it? Joe shook his head slowly. No, this was a setup. And I was never the only one they were after. The real enemy was still out there. And now they knew Joe was coming. Days later, the company was no longer the same. Federal investigators had moved in, and the media had exploded with headlines like, Janitor exposes multimillion-dollar tech conspiracy, and Poor black worker outsmarts elite cyber criminals. Joe became an unlikely hero, though he never wanted the spotlight. The CEO made a public statement, clearing Joe's name, praising his courage, and calling him the man who saved the company from collapse. Malik received an offer to join the internal cybersecurity team, and Ava was promoted for her quick thinking and loyalty. As for Joe, the CEO offered him a permanent position as lead systems analyst, along with full back pay and benefits. But Joe politely declined. "I didn't come here to start over," he said with a quiet smile. "I came here to finish something." He left the company the next week, walking out the same doors he had cleaned for 2 years. But this time, people stood and clapped. The once invisible janitor had not only solved a tech crisis but also exposed corruption that could have destroyed countless jobs and lives. In the end, Joe reminded everyone that brilliance can come from the most unexpected places and that integrity isn't about your title or paycheck but what you choose to do when no one's watching. And somewhere out there, Joe moved on to the next problem because that's what real heroes do. They don't wait for permission. They just show up and fix what others said couldn't be fixed. 3.